Hello everyone, here are my 10 favourite games from 2023, which everyone says is one of the best years in gaming for a long time, which is right, but also more of an indicator of how poor the last few years have been, rather than a real marker of the overall quality of games that came out this year. And it conveniently ignores the fact that the industry is starting to collapse in on itself as the rising financial and human cost of making games continues to spiral out of control. But other than that, yeah, what a great year for video games it has been. But first, some honourable mentions. This game should be a total stinker. The original Lords of the Fallen was so tedious and middle of the road, but this game essentially tries to remove it from existence by taking its name and hoping we all forget about it. And at first, the signs weren't good for this one either. When I finally installed this game and booted it up, it barely worked. Multiple crashes, graphical glitches and piss poor performance had me giving up on it within the first hour and potentially threw it onto the ever-growing pile of dead rubbish Soulsborne knockoffs that I have sat next to my PC. However, the developer stuck with it, constantly patching it over the first few weeks, and for some reason so did I. And after this rough start, Lords of the Fallen really starts to find its feet. The art design in the areas from the mid to end game is really impressive. The boss design is largely decent, the way that you can shape your character build is nice and flexible, allowing for lots of freedom in your chosen playstyle, and the lore of the world and characters was surprisingly engaging. Lords of the Fallen's unique selling point is the ability to traverse between the real world of Axiom and the Umbral Realm, a realm that exists just under the surface of reality that looks like H.R. Giger's worst nightmare. It's all skeletal structures and faceless, seemingly dead giants looming in the distance. It's full of endlessly respawning mobs, new pathways across ravines that allow you to get to previously inaccessible areas, and, if you stick around in there too long, some extra hard hunter enemies that will come and try to put an end to you. There are plenty of ways to enter the Umbral Realm. Of course, first of all, you can just go there by using your Umbral Lantern, but also, if you die in Axiom, you're taken to the Umbral Realm, and it essentially acts as an extra life when this happens. You can also peer into the Umbral Realm temporarily using your lantern, but if one of the many enemies that roam around there hits you, you're pulled in immediately, and the first time this happens, it is a cracking jump scare. It's all a bit Soul Reaver, and obviously that's a good thing. Ultimately, I think my enjoyment of Lords of Fallen is directly related to how much I love Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 is a weird, slow-paced, clunky game that has a vast variety of ways that you can customise your build, and it's dead easy to get involved with the PvP and PvE stuff, and it has a load of cool bosses. This feels very similar in those regards, which should tell you whether or not this game is for you, but like me, if you're a Dark Souls 2 fan, time to rise up. Let's be honest, the original Alan Wake is a bit of a stinker. Like most Remedy games, it gets everything right except for the fucking shooting, which wouldn't be a problem if the primary way that you interacted with them was shooting, and that means most of the game is rubbish. Alan Wake 2 changes pace from their usual action-focused titles to be something a little bit more akin to a walking sim with a bit of light combat sprinkled into it, and the end result is absolutely genius. By being a more focused exploration-based title, it allows the stuff that Remedy are absolutely brilliant at to really shine. The atmosphere, the bizarre left-field surrealism, the plot and character development, all of it rises to the top when the game isn't structured around constant piss-poor combat encounters. You can make a fair argument that Remedy are the best around at this stuff, even in games I don't enjoy playing, like Control. Their vibes are unmatched, and here, they're front and centre, and there's nothing that detracts from them. There's so much more to do here than in previous Remedy games. There's really clever puzzles that warp the world around you, and they seamlessly tie into the narrative in a way that I can't really talk about without spoiling the surprise for you. The detective work element was always going to appeal to my taste, but the way that you can jump in and out of the Mind Palace to piece together bits of evidence instantaneously is so slick, and the way that this is used to slowly uncover plot elements is unlike anything I've actually seen before. It's also the best looking game I've ever played. I've been playing it using GeForce Now on their top tier 4090 machines, and it is absurdly impressive. I mean, fucking look at it. I don't even know what path tracing is, but let me tell you, it makes a game look like this. For my money, this is Remedy's finest game to date. It's rare that a game that cuts out action to focus more on atmosphere and narrative is going to appeal to me, but in this specific case, when the developer is a master of those two things, creating a framework to showcase the stuff that they're best at has resulted in a truly excellent game, and really turned my opinion of Remedy and their output around. I can't wait to see what comes next. A new 2D Mario is always gonna be a good time, so there's no surprise that Super Mario Wonder makes this list. It should make any top 10 games released in 2023 list. The only real question is, why isn't it higher on the list? I mean, it's the closest Nintendo have come to a new Super Mario World. Surely it's bloody brilliant. And it is. It's brilliant. Super Mario Wonder is endlessly creative, throwing new ideas at you constantly, rarely reusing concepts for levels, and in the handful of times it does, remixes them or bumps the difficulty in a meaningful way. It keeps you in this constant sweet spot of testing your Mario abilities and throwing stuff at you that you've never seen previously, forcing you to dig deep into your Super Mario muscle memory and fly by the seat of your dungarees as you tackle the challenge that's been put in front of you. The Wonder Seeds are the real genius of Super Mario Wonder. Collecting one of these on each stage after sometimes having to work quite hard to find it in the first place causes everything to go completely fucking tonto. In the original footage shown for the game, it simply looked like things got a little bit trippy, but the actual way that these sections remix the gimmick that the level has been based around, it's almost like the level before you collect the seed is a warm-up act before the main event, getting you used to things before the Wonder Seed rips the rug out from underneath you. One early example is a level that introduces this bull-type enemy that you can bait into rushing at you, and it destroys any brick blocks that are in its path. You spend the first half of the level learning how they attack and how they break the bricks, but when you collect the Wonder Seed, you're suddenly running from and eventually on top of a fucking stampede of them as they smash their way through the rest of the level. Unfortunately, it is kind of impossible to talk about the Wonder Seed sections without really ruining their brilliant surprises, so you'll just have to take my word for it when I say expect anything. When you collect the Wonder Seed, all bets are off. So, if it is so bloody brilliant, then why isn't it higher? Well, it's a little too easy for my tastes. Even when you're in the final world, there's still a few 2-star difficulty stages popping up, and although they're all uniformly brilliant, and yes, there are some really hard stages in the post-game content, I just wish there was a little bit more of a challenge throughout. You know? If it was, it would comfortably sit at the top of this list. I couldn't believe what I was reading when F-Zero 99 was announced during a Nintendo Direct earlier this year. I was so excited to see the return of a true classic racing game, a game that still holds up remarkably well in 2023, and seeing it attached to the brilliant 99 formula that has been used so well with other classic titles in the past few years, well, it sounded like a masterstroke. The 99 games walk this brilliant tightrope where they're super fast paced and fairly light and breezy, so when you do crash out, you can quickly jump into another game and have another go, but when you're in the business end of things, there is some of the most exciting intense action available. Victory is the most important thing in the world, but also it doesn't really matter at exactly the same time. It's equal parts high stakes and low stakes, and they're all utterly compulsive. And yet, people were so negative about the idea of F-Zero 99 before they'd even downloaded the thing. F-Zero as a battle royale game was made out to be like it was fucking Hitler 2, or an absolute affront to God. Anyway, people are stupid and F-Zero 99 is a work of genius, mates. You and 98 other racers line up on a custom bit of starter track, hit the gas and eventually jump into one of the classic tracks from Nintendo's 1990 belter. Obviously, it's carnage, so you're going to have to act fast if you're going to stay alive. Boost power works a little differently to the SNES original, with hitting boost giving you a burst of speed at the cost of quarter of your life bar. Simply put, 4 boosts will put you at death's door, and a single touch of a wall or by one of the many other competitors will blow you to pieces and have you eliminated from the race. It's a very simple but very effective bit of risk-reward strategy that riffs on the rules of the SNES original. Every collision causes glowing orbs to drop onto the track. Picking these up fills a meter which, when maxed out, allows you access to a floating skyway above the track, covered in boost pads and also, crucially, avoiding the crowded pack of other racers. The further back you are, the more of these orbs are likely to be scattered for you to pick up, and this is a much more graceful solution than simply putting in rubber banding as a catch-up mechanic. You can also perform the F-Zero X spin attack to knock rivals out of the way, and if your spin attack delivers the killing blow, grants you an instant health refill and of course access to more safer boosts. Each one of these things has a really clearly defined use. If you're at the back, grab the orbs. If you're in the middle of the pack, start trying to take out the other racers and thin the herd with a spin attack. And if you're at the front, boost away, safe in the knowledge that you're not going to hit heavy player traffic. All of these aspects of F-Zero's core fundamentals, track mastery, taking out your rivals, and boost management, and the risk reward associated with each one is represented here and fits perfectly into the Battle Royale style formula. So, I get it, I do, I really do. I get that this isn't the F-Zero game that everyone wanted. However, what we do have is a fantastic game in its own right, and it's going to be a real pisser when Nintendo inevitably shutter the service for this in a year or so. So, rather than complain about something that was never going to happen, enjoy the really fucking good thing that did happen while you can. This is without a doubt the coolest game released in 2023. I mean, just look at it go, fucking hell, man. It's amazing. It's everything you'd want in a mech game, and it is barely any different from games released on the PS3 and PS2, and to some extent, the PS1. That's right. Armored Core 6 isn't just a brilliant video game. It's a reminder that developers do not have to make every game feel like every other game in the AAA space. Sure, the way that developers have refined game mechanics and control standardization over the years has certainly done a lot of good, but it's had this horrible side effect of making a lot of games all feel the same. It doesn't matter whether it's Wolverine or Nathan Drake or some fucking lad from Assassin's Creed you're controlling, you're ostensibly playing the same game in many ways. And it sucks! Armored Core 6 is just so confident in what it offers. There's a stroke of genius about the fact that you can refund any mech part for full cost at the shop whenever you want, meaning there's absolutely no penalty for pissing about and making whatever mech your heart desires. You're encouraged to interact with this key system, tweaking your build to suit the needs of the mission or further improving the way that your mech fits your chosen playstyle. It's endlessly deep, and although there was a top build found quickly after the initial release, From Software have patched the game to allow for far more choice at the high level. And this is all before we've even fired a single missile. The missions are varied and they challenge you in different ways. The bosses are really difficult and require either mastery of arena, movement or arsenal, or mastery of the mech builder, as you can basically create something that makes the boss's difficulty completely negligible if you're smart enough to figure it out. It looks incredible, it sounds incredible, and the storyline, although hardly front and centre, is surprisingly gripping and provides a few of 2023's most dramatic moments. It's just really, really good, and it's cool to see From do something that isn't a Soulsborne style game for the first time in a while, because right now, they can do no wrong. They're right up there as one of the best studios around. Just think about this for a second. In 2023, From Software released a new Armored Core game, and it didn't pander to any of the needs of the modern gamer at all. And they delivered an absolute banger that was critically and commercially a success. Let that be a lesson to developers everywhere. Class never fades. There's just so much to Street Fighter 6. Whether you're a hardcore fighting game player or a casual Street Fighter fan who hasn't touched the series for a generation or so, Street Fighter 6 has something for you. And not only that, it manages to offer enough compelling reasons for both sides to dip their toes into the other side's water. It's a strong package, arguably the best overall fighting game package ever made, but that would all be for naught if the fighting system that underpinned it all wasn't up to much, which is good that it just happens to be the most flexible, versatile and expressive combat in a Street Fighter game to date. The only reason why Street Fighter 6 isn't topping this list is because of how I play it. I'm really into fighting games and I play them to improve and challenge myself, and I love watching high level play between top players in tournaments, and it's in this area where Street Fighter 6 has let me down a little bit. In any competitive game, the meta is often quickly figured out, and that's not really an issue, but unfortunately for me, I find the current competitive meta a little dull. When I lose, I don't care. When I win, I don't really care either. It bores me a touch. And it's a little too one-dimensional at the level that I try and play at, or like to watch people play at. But I understand that that's a me issue. Outside of that, the game is brilliant, and of course, they're going to patch it. There's no way that Street Fighter 6 at the end of 2024 is going to be anything like this Street Fighter 6 we have right now, so I have faith that things will change in a way that gets me interested again in the near future. Outside of that really specific complaint, when you're playing your mates or at a local casuals event where everyone is just trying to have fun and explore the incredibly deep for experts but instantly useful for beginners combat system, messing around with the really varied roster of fighters and just enjoying the perfect 1v1 action that Street Fighter has always delivered, it's almost untouchable. It's a phenomenal achievement, and worth noting, most first versions of fighting games are far from what is recognised to be them at their best, so the fact that Street Fighter 6 is this good already is a very, very exciting thing indeed. Oh boy, I loved this. Teon's previous title, Terminator Resistance, is a game that I have already talked about at length. That game is a solid, serviceable first-person shooter that has a dash of the recent Fallout games in the formula, meaning there's some larger areas that you can explore, some stealth elements, and a little bit of crafting. Nothing too outrageous, but this creates a foundation for the incredible Terminator fan service to really shine. It's honestly the best bit of Terminator-based media since Terminator 2, and the clear, genuine love the developers have for the franchise elevates what would be a good but not great title into something I think is well worth checking out. And I've said it since RoboCop Rogue City was announced, if they keep that level of love and authenticity for RoboCop, then this game was going to be an absolute belter. And they bloody well did. A first-person shooter game where you can't sprint, move like a tank, have no real incentive to ever get into cover, and have a default gun, RoboCop's iconic Auto 9, that is so good you don't have to use anything else, is on paper a complete recipe for disaster. But it works. It works because it's RoboCop. It's authentically RoboCop. Everything about the game is perfectly RoboCop. And that's something I think really needs to be given so much praise. But they didn't bottle it, and they didn't make a game that feels like everything else because they're just trying to chase that lucrative mass market money. But instead, ensure that the game that they did make is the most accurate, enjoyable, and filled with proper love for the license RoboCop game ever made. To say that this game is only good if you like RoboCop is a little unfair, however. The shooting in this game, the sheer fucking hellfire that you can unleash upon a room full of perps is really something to behold. It's just so aggressive and violent, and it absolutely crosses the Evil Dead line into actually being really fucking hilarious in how easy it is to murder hundreds of lads in the name of robot justice. Just like the film. It hits that satirical, purposely over-the-top tone perfectly. It's that word again. Perfect. I think that's the best way to describe Robocop Rogue City. Despite some of the bugs, despite a little lack of polish in parts, despite clearly being hamstrung by its budget, it doesn't matter because it's perfect. At this point, I should say that you should buy it for $1, but it's like 50 quid or something, so buy it for that instead. The question everyone asked at launch was, is the Resident Evil 4 remake better than the original? And the answer is, who cares? Does it even matter? The point is, it's an exceptionally good video game. Unlike the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3, this remake delivers exactly what I want from a remake by putting a new modern spin on things, but crucially maintaining the same feel of the original, unlike those other two. Leon is a bit slower and more cumbersome, as you'd expect from going from the snappy digital movement of the original to full analog controls, and the Gyarados enemies are a lot more aggressive, they rush you down a lot more regularly, and they take a bit more damage. And at first, this seems like it might end up being a bit of a frustrating mix, but it isn't, because of one key new addition, a tool that helps you deal with almost every situation. A parry. Parry Saturn. Parry dice by the dashboard light. Parry Dias. Adding a parry to this game is always going to be something that wins me over, because I genuinely think there's no game in the world that wouldn't be improved by the addition of a nice risk-reward parry. Tetris, Stardew Valley, Metal Gear Solid, stick a parry in them and I guarantee you they're a better game for it. Obviously there have been a few changes to the structure of some of the environments, and amazingly, it's mostly for the better. Of course, things like the iconic Ganado village at the beginning has been accurately recreated, but things like the fishing village now have more verticality, with enemies attacking from a high scaffold that runs along one side of it. Later on, in the castle, it's a lot less linear than the original, requiring a bit more exploration than before to get through each section, while familiar sections are given a remix. They retain some key elements, but change things up to give them a new spin. There are some wholesale changes to some of the puzzle sections, with little twists that play on your expectations, a bit like the brilliant remake of the first Resident Evil game. The final few chapters on the Island Fortress use the significant increase in graphical fidelity to really make it into a spectacular finale. The main disappointment I felt about this remake is not what they've changed, but in fact, what they've chosen to leave out. There's loads of little encounters and set pieces that just didn't make the cut, be it the sequence where the truck barrels down the hill towards you and you have to snipe the Ganado driving, or perhaps some of the trap rooms in the castle with the spiked ceilings, or what about the brilliant daft moments involving a room with the Gatling gun, or the bit where the painting drops to reveal a booth housing two lads with rocket launchers, or the part where loads of different groups of enemies keep appearing over and over and over again behind a metal shutter every time it rises. They've managed to maintain the over-the-top action and the way things escalate as the game progresses to its finale, but there's a playful cheekiness to some of the combat encounters that seems to have fallen by the wayside. That's a personal thing though, and it's not really a complaint that affects playing the game. What we have ended up with here is about as good a remake as you could want without it outright replacing the original release. They've modernised it, but they've kept the core mechanics intact. They've changed key elements to give it its own flavour, but ultimately it still feels like Resident Evil 4. They've changed things, but every change is meaningful, and if not better, certainly works within the rules of this new interpretation of the game. Put bluntly, both games are brilliant. This is a worthy tribute to one of the finest video games of all time, and regardless of which one you end up enjoying the most, it's fitting that it took its own remake to find a game that reaches the high standards it set back in 2005. Personally, I love that two of the best games I have ever played are called Resident Evil 4. Despite not being particularly asked about the demo that dropped just before it came out, I ended up loving Lies of P. It's good, undeniably so. It manages to capture some of the essential elements of From Software's masterpiece Bloodborne in regards to how it plays and how the combat and movement feels. And it wraps it up in an aesthetic that manages to combine some of Bloodborne's gothic horror with a pinch of Resident Evil 4 and just a touch of its own vibe and some really impressive visuals. I found it to be just the most fascinating little thing. I love it. It borrows so much from Bloodborne, and to be fair, mostly the right stuff, and it pulls all of those things off to a really high standard. The setting is cool, the visuals are great, the enemy variety and boss design is cracking too, so why isn't it as good as Bloodborne? It's little things, tiny details that don't make a game bad when they aren't present, but are the kind of difference between a game being simply damn fine and an essential all-timer. The kind of touches that get applied to a game by an elite level game director like Hidetaka Miyazaki. However, this is the closest anyone has ever gotten to bettering the output of From Software, and simply getting near Bloodborne puts this head and shoulders above almost everything else around. There's 3 clear areas where I think you can say with confidence that Lies of P is either superior to Bloodborne or simply brings something to the table that is really smart, unique, and undeniably cool. First of all, it's the performance. Now, I hate to talk about performance in games, and I do think that if you think that Bloodborne is inferior because it runs at 30 frames a second, then you're an idiot. But let's not beat around the bush. If you've got the option of 60 frames a second, then take it, man. Secondly, unlike Bloodborne, there's a whole load more of variety in your build choice thanks to the 3 starting classes and the sheer variety of weapons and customization possibilities. You can really shape your build around your playstyle in a way that, although present in Bloodborne, is far less nuanced than what you can do in Lies of P. Finally, and for my money, this is Lies of P's truly genius idea. It's the ability to regain one of your Estus Flask equivalents when you've used them all up. Once you've healed with your final Estus, or whatever they're called in Lies of P, I can't remember, you begin charging up a meter by landing hits on enemies, and once this meter is filled, you get your last Estus back, which means that you're never out of a fight and you're encouraged to play the game on the front foot. In Bloodborne, when you're down to the last of your health and you have no means of recovering it against the boss, it can feel a little helpless and that you might as well just die and try again. But here, you should never give up. With some skilled play, you can get that bonus Estus, get yourself a health boost when you really need it, and then of course begin charging another. It's such a smart mechanic and one that harmonises perfectly with the best elements of this type of game. It is a near perfect bit of risk reward. The thing about Lies of P is, even though some people may look at it as a fairly cynical Bloodborne ripoff that you can play on things other than a PS4, but even that way it turns out that a Bloodborne ripoff is still remarkably good. It borrows a whole lot from Software's masterpiece, sure, but it delivers all of those elements brilliantly, and as you get further and further into Lies of P, it starts to stamp its own identity onto things and becomes more comfortable with what it brings to the table. Despite falling short of the truly elite titles it takes influence from, I think Lies of P still sits comfortably above the other best of the rest Soulsborne titles, like Nioh for instance, and is easily the finest non-From Software game in the genre. The recently announced DLC and sequel are very much on my radar because this was my surprise of the year and dangerously close to being the best game I played this year. There was a moment many hours into Tears of the Kingdom where I just put the pad down and said out loud to myself in my flat, how have they fucking managed this? I consider Breath of the Wild to be a complete masterpiece, not only a stellar Zelda game, but a game that redefined the open world genre and set a bar so high that only Elden Ring has come close to it in the years following its release. But Tears of the Kingdom is just so much more fun than Breath of the Wild. It's also a much better Zelda game in the more traditional sense. It's a better game than what is often considered one of the best video games ever made. I still can't quite believe it. Using the same world map as Breath of the Wild gives this game heavy Majora's Mask vibes. Although that game does have a totally different map to Ocarina of Time, there's a similarity in the way that it reworks existing assets to play on your expectations. Locations have little tweaks and changes, but it is the familiarity and seeing the way that they've been twisted that actually makes them feel really fresh. There's always a spin on them, be it different weather conditions, new routes carved into them, or some other environmental difference that changes things up a bit. Characters have lives, with some major events taking place between the two games, bringing new characters into the mix or offering up a different take on an old friend or two. It gives Hyrule, perhaps for the first time ever, a lived-in, consistent feel. Time has passed, and things have changed. The new abilities are where Tears of the Kingdom really shines. While the ones you had in Breath of the Wild could all be used in genius ways, with videos popping up on social media years after release showcasing the things that you could do with them that were never previously thought possible, the abilities here have so many more instantly obvious uses. Ascend literally allows you to ascend through solid surfaces, which is really useful for climbing structures and getting out of one of the many caves that you'll find dotted around Hyrule. That's probably the simplest one, but even that one, the potential is endless. Recall can be used to move an item back the way it came. Simple stuff like turning a water wheel back on itself or sending an enemy projectile right back at it, for instance. But honestly, I found myself mainly using it almost like an undo function. The amount of times some harebrained contraption of mine slid down a hill away from me, only for me to use recall and watch it return, was a shamefully high amount of times. Fuse is the one you'll be using a lot during exploration, as it'll allow you to stick something to your weapon or shield, be that a rock or a tree trunk, or things that break off enemies when you kill them. As well as potentially adding a new status to your weapon or shield, it also buffs the damage output and durability. The smartest ability, of course, is the Ultra Hand. This is the one that allows you to stick stuff together, allowing you to build whatever contraptions your imagination can come up with. These could be things that you find out in the field, like tree trunks, rocks, planks of wood, but there's also building-specific items created by an ancient race called the Zonai. These items vary from winged gliders, to wheels, to fans, to rockets, to various weapons and more, and as well as finding them scattered around the world map, there are these giant gacha machines that you can dump resources into that you get from killing enemies, and they'll spit out a load of random ones that you can store in your inventory and pop them out when needed. So far, the only limit has been my own creativity, and much like Breath of the Wild, the consistency in the rules that govern the game world mean that if you think something is going to work, it probably will. Or it'll fail hilariously. Combining these new abilities with the pre-existing knowledge you may already have from Breath of the Wild allows you to think of some really creative solutions to the problems that this game throws at you. That brilliant magic feeling that you get in Breath of the Wild when you think that you cheated your way through a particular situation through your own smart use of the tools provided, well, it happens a lot more often here. The key difference is in the practicality of these new abilities. While there's no denying that the abilities you had in Breath of the Wild are really cool, you tended to only use them for solving puzzles or for very specific tasks. The creativity came from how you manipulated the consistent rules that govern Hyrule, or react to them when they're thrust upon you. You could stretch the rules to breaking point, but rarely actually break them completely. In Tears of the Kingdom, you'll find yourself using these abilities far more often and in ways you're not entirely sure Nintendo intended. Breaking the rules of the game completely, or at least feeling like you're breaking the rules. And that's always thrilling. For all of you whiny, uncultured bitches who don't like the weapons breaking in Breath of the Wild, well, guess what? Your shit still breaks in this too. And yes, it's still brilliant. It still forces you to think on your feet, constantly evaluate what you have on you, and either plan accordingly or react to the situation. However, there are quite a few ways to mitigate it this time. As mentioned before, fusing your weapon to even the most basic things like a bit of wood or a rock, for instance, will give you a fairly substantial boost to both damage and durability. So you're encouraged to do it with pretty much every standard weapon you find lying around. Every enemy usually drops 3 things, something that can be used in cooking or elixirs, something that can be stuck on an arrow to change the properties of it, and something that can be fused onto a weapon. And everything is useful, even the generic moblin horns can be stuck onto a wooden stick to make a decent spear weapon, and basic things like keys eyeballs will give your arrows a homing missile property. It's yet another thing to play around with, experiment with, and see what the results are. You can stick any resource to your weapon or arrows, or even just straight up throw them, essentially tooling up Link with an arsenal of status effect grenades. Stick a bomb flower on an arrow, and you get a bomb arrow. Throw a bomb flower, and you've basically got a hand grenade. Explosions destroy rocks, create fire if the blast hits combustible material. The fire can then be used to create gusts of wind, or if you're really desperate, even cook your food from your inventory. A lot of this stuff is the same as Breath of the Wild, but that new layer of creativity that lies on top of the pre-existing world rules is another thing that makes Tears of the Kingdom feel like a fresh experience. And a better one. And that's exactly it. Tears of the Kingdom is easily better than Breath of the Wild, which is an absolutely mad thing to say. With hindsight, Breath of the Wild now almost feels like the groundwork for this direct sequel. Every aspect is an improvement or a lesson learned, with all of the stuff that oozed confidence in Breath of the Wild, the trust that all the systems will work in a cohesive and consistent way to allow loads of player expression in a playstyle, and how to tackle situations and puzzles, oozes even more confidence this time around. I've barely scratched the surface of cool things to do, and I'm like 100 hours deep. The creative solutions I've heard from other people of how to solve some of the shrines, they're ludicrous. the seemingly inconsequential side quests that open up into hours-long adventures, the one-off ideas that could be fleshed out into their own fucking game. It's something else. It's the best game of 2023. Hello everyone, I'm just jumping in here at the end of this video just to give everyone who has supported me this year a massive thank you. If you're a member of my Patreon, I have to tell you none of this stuff happens without your support. So streams, any video content, any audio content, any writing, your support allows me to kind of justify spending my limited free time these days on doing cool stuff like this. So again, much appreciated. For the rest of you, just thank you for watching or listening or whatever, doing anything with the stuff that I've put out. Unless the Patreon grows massively in the next year, all of my stuff's going to remain free for everyone in some way. It's just if you want to show some support, then you can head over there to the address that's on screen. It's $2 a month, and you can join an exclusive Discord and call me a dickhead in there or whatever. Maybe we'll have some discussions about exclusive content moving forward. But for now, again, can't thank you guys enough, and I'm sure I'll talk to you again soon.